Welcome everyone to Midwest Tree ID. On this channel, it is my mission to help you learn an abundance of trees that grow right here in the Midwest, and some key features on how to identify them. There's just one thing to clarify before we begin. We're not going to be throwing hatred or ridiculing any of the species that we're going to be talking about. But we do, however, want to encourage thoughtful conversation in the comments about personal experiences and things like that. Please try to remember that everything has value and that we are here to enjoy nature and everything it has to offer. So without anything else, let's jump right in. Hey, welcome back everybody. Today we're in Bloomington, Illinois at Miller Park, and we are talking about Acer platanoides. This is the Norway maple, probably one of the most abundantly planted maples, probably across most of the Midwest. And it's really no wonder why. One of the main reasons is for the crimson-leafed cultivars that I will show you later, but right now we're going to talk about just the straight Acer platanoides regular species. Now, like pretty much all our maples, it's going to have these, stupid wind, it's going to have these really pronounced, large, deep green leaves. Of course, they'll get deeper as the summer goes on. And it's got primarily 3 to 5 deep lobes with points at each end, with the middle lobe typically being the tallest. Pretty standard with most of our maples. One of the main qualities about Norway maple is that when you bend and break one of the leaves, I don't think I'm going to be able to get it to do this, or at least get you guys to be able to see it, since this camera doesn't like to zoom in. But yeah, it won't work. It's not going to do it. But sometimes you can see this milky sap coming out of the broken leaf petiole there. Sometimes you can see it as well on some of the branches, but I'm not seeing it happen with this one. Maybe if I do that, can you kind of see how it's getting white there? I wish it would focus in on that, but it's not. Anyway, yeah, it gets that white milky sap. And so this tree can be good for tapping for maple syrup. It's definitely not the most ideal choice, but it can be good for that. But let's go ahead and take a look at the bark and the habit, and we'll get into some of the other key features about the Norway maple. So Norway maple bark is going to be very, very similar to some of our ash species. It looks very similar. It's got these rather tight, but can be somewhat loose and deep furrows and fissures that typically range from a dull gray to a lighter brown. And even some of the broken, ripped off pieces can look a little bit light tan almost. And that's pretty consistent throughout the entire tree. And when on real young specimens, that bark is really, really tight. It can be difficult to differentiate from sugar maple on young specimens. Norway maple can have a range of shapes and sizes, typically getting to be about 60 feet in height with a variation of spreads. This one is probably one of the more narrow ones that I've seen, but they can have a spread just about as equal to their height in some cases, and they are very, very dense, as you can see by this one here. And it is still fairly early in the season, but you can see how dense this middle section here is. And it can be very difficult sometimes if you have a lot of other trees around, or if it's your only tree in your yard. It can be very difficult to grow grass underneath of one of these, as well as a sugar maple. It can be very tough. But these trees can also be kind of picturesque. They can be rounded. They can be kind of oval shaped, as this one probably used to be. And their trunk is not always super straight. It can be kind of curvy and wavy, kind of like what you're seeing with this one. So kind of a neat looking, unusual specimen sometimes. One of the other major features about the Norway maple is they produce these types of helicopter seeds. The ones that you find that spin all over the place, this is one of those kinds of trees that does produce those. And that's pretty much true of pretty much all maples. Only these here are very underdeveloped. These are not fully developed yet. They will be about twice this size when they're fully developed, and they appear in pairs and sometimes in clusters, and you can break them each apart. And inside of this piece here is where your actual seed is, and so they can disperse that way. Which brings us to one of the other common issues, I'll say, with the Norway maple, and I'll get into what I believe is a much better system for talking about invasive trees, especially with non-natives, and Norway maple being native to predominantly Europe. It is obviously not native to the US, and sometimes it is considered to be invasive. So let's talk about, in my opinion, what is a much better way of ranking these trees that are considered invasive, because every behavior of many of these species is very, very different. And so classifying them all under one category really doesn't make a lot of scientific sense. So what I've been kind of working to fine tune is a system that is a 5-tiered ranking system, with tier 1 being the least prolific, least abundant, least problematic, to 5 being the most invasive and actually ones that are capable of being a problem in the landscape and elsewhere. And so tier 1 is, well, I already kind of described tier 1. Tier 2 is where Norway maple fits, here in central Illinois. This is entirely regional. Norway maple, it has the capability of producing high levels of seed and can disperse them in far ranges, but the establishment of seedlings is exceptionally low, and very rarely is it seen penetrating deep native forests. If anything, you're probably finding it in the occasional fence row. That's very rare here in probably much of the central Midwest. But if you go to the East Coast, that's where they have the problem with it. We don't really see that abundant problem here in most of the central Midwest, and probably as well the southern Midwest. Tier 3 trees are more for your colonizers, so trees that can be very aggressive by the roots. They can send up suckers from the ground and are very high levels of establishment, but not significant penetration of native woods. It can, but very rare. And we'll talk about which trees fall into those categories when we talk about them in future videos. Tier 4 are trees that are very, very high seed production and can disperse them exceptionally far, and very high establishment, and frequent, occasion, or at least occasional to frequent penetration of native woods. And then 5 is running rampant everywhere. You can find it in every ditch, every roadway. Almost any native forest is struggling to remove it. So we will talk about all of those species, and we will give them their rank whenever we get to those. But that's pretty much going to cover it for the Norway maple. Again, like I said, Norway maple is ranking as a tier 2, so can produce high seed, low establishment of seedlings in the landscape and native areas. Really not a significant ecological threat as many will try to claim it to be here in central Illinois. So today we are standing underneath one of our crimson, or at least somewhat crimson, Norway maples. And these actually are producing seeds, but these seeds are pretty much going to be sterile, not really going to be viable, which is actually pretty true of most of our Norway maples seeds anyway here in this region. As we've already kind of talked about with the regular Norway maple, it is technically in a tier 2 for prolific, which means it can spread its seed far, but at very low levels of establishment. But these are going to be the maples that typically form your deep maroon burgundy leaves and hold them that way throughout the entire growing season. Oh, here, you can kind of see, if the camera will zoom in on it, the milky sap from the Norway maples that I was talking about with the green leafed ones. Let's go ahead and take a look at the habit, and you can kind of see just what it looks like in full rather than just a few leaves that I've cut off the tree. I apologize for the lack of sun. I have no control over that. But this particular crimson maple here really is getting a lot of shade, probably a lot of the time from this silver maple that's right next to it here. But you can kind of get a good glimpse, good idea of how deep burgundy some of those leaves, especially in the upper canopies, actually can be. And when they're more shaded, like what you're seeing kind of down below, you really don't have as much of that burgundy chlorophyll as what you are going to get if you're seeing if the species is in more sun. But you know, they certainly are really nicely shaped, really not getting to be as big as your typical Norway maples, pretty well maxing out at about 35 feet, maybe 40 feet. Um, and to be honest, it's not the most long-lived cultivar either. Not like your traditional Norway maple that can survive for 90 years. These crimson maples might get you about 60 years. Some of them are more long-lived than that, but it just kind of depends on the conditions. But it's not uncommon to find them in decline in parks. So it's kind of nice that we were able to find one, even if it has been in mostly shade and isn't quite as fully red as what we might like. But yeah, that's pretty much going to be the story of your crimson Norway maple. So be sure to like and subscribe, and thanks for joining me, and we will see you guys next time.